For all those who appreciate the work that we're doing here on Standing for Truth, please hit that subscribe button because we are just getting started.
Okay, it looks like we are live today. Thank you everybody for being here for our very special guest. We've got Dr. Charles Jackson here with us today to discuss creation and evolution. We are pumped. It is indeed an honor to interview somebody who has done so much to help so many of us with his presentations, debates, lectures, videos, writings, and so on. I'm really, really excited for this. I always appreciate Dr. J's incredible enthusiasm and amazing knowledge on these very important subjects. So, and yes, we are taking questions from our awesome audience. Therefore, whatever questions come to mind pertaining to the topic, of course, please tag me and I will save them for Dr. J, and we'll get to as many as we can. I'm going to hand it over to Matt, though, for just a brief introduction before we hand it over to Dr. J. So, Matt, go ahead.
All right. Thanks, SFT. And yeah, this is going to be awesome. I'm too excited for this one. This is definitely going to be one to remember. So Dr. Jackson, he's our guest today. And from what I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, is that you have basically 4 degrees in science and education, and you've taught secondary school sciences for 11 years, and then college biology and chemistry for 6 years, and then teaching education classes for 6 years. And then in 2003, you founded the Points of Origins, and began teaching, speaking, and debating in creation science education. So Dr. Jackson, thanks again for being here with us today. If there's anything else that I missed or that you wanted to say before we begin, take it away.
Well, a lot of those are overlapping years and things like that. But like we said before we started, I've been teaching. I started teaching high school in 1980.
Okay, nice.
Okay, well, awesome. Then, Dr. J, I appreciate you giving us your time. I know you're incredibly busy, so I really appreciate you giving us your time for this interview. We do have a number of questions on various topics, and I think I think a good way to start this that will lead into a profitable discussion and gain, I think, some interesting feedback from the audience. Dr. Jackson, I've thoroughly enjoyed your talks on junk DNA and DNA function, and we often cover this topic on this channel. So I think it would be a good place to start and an interesting topic to engage in. Can you touch on maybe some of the claims made by evolutionists in regard to junk DNA, and what does the evidence say about, for example, the function of our genome? Does what we see support creation versus evolution, in other words, Dr. J?
Well, Dr. Gary Parker once said to me that evolution thrives in the gray areas, thrives in the areas where there is a lack of data. And that's really the only place. And back in the day, when we were really ignorant about what 98% of our DNA was doing, and they pronounced it to be junk DNA because we couldn't trace the proteins that were produced back to a gene that was doing it, and all these other genes, we didn't know what they were doing. And since we're so smart, it must not be doing anything. Therefore, it was pronounced junk DNA and pronounced the logical throwback from evolution, from back in the day when we were worms and rats and fish and stuff, that these were leftover sequences that had no function, like the tailbone, the coccyx and your tonsils and things like that, and the appendix. And so the history of this conflict, goes back into the 1930s and even into the 60s and 70s. Then we started finding out not only for these junk organs, but we started finding out the functions of the junk DNA. One of the very first ones was a sequence in the junk part in like 1999, where it actually was the nerve center for knowing in the X chromosome, because females have 2 of them and males only have 1. Double dose of some of those chromosomes would be bad. Some of the genes on those chromosomes would be bad. So there's a coordination between the 2 X chromosomes that females have on which genes to turn off and which genes to turn on, and which ones both X's will go ahead and leave active. And nobody ever knew how that was coordinated. Well, it was a sequence in the junk sequence that was doing that, and that was the first hint we had that the junk was actually doing something. In 2012, there was a bunch of papers came out in 2007, but in 2012, finally, the total last nail in the coffin of this junk DNA fantasy that was needed by the evolutionists to bolster their view of genetics was gone. Even Eric Lander out at MIT and Harvard, who participated in the chimp genome sequence and everything, he said, it was never true. It never was true. We were mistaken. There's no such thing. It's an outdated term. There's no such thing as junk DNA. So ramifications or uses or employing it or exploiting it for the purpose of evolution or not that happened for so many decades, kind of like the Piltdown man fossil was used for 40 years. This is now over. I mean, it's gone. There's no such thing. And all of the secular geneticists finally agree with what the creationists have always said. There's no such thing as junk DNA.
Well, that's an awesome answer, Dr. J. I love the way I've seen you put it before, that you can just imagine a gene that tells a gene, which in turn tells another gene how to make what it makes and when to make it. You know, the incredible functionality in our genome. It almost seems like it's now the new vestigial argument that they used back in the day. Now they're just applying it to the genome because we now know there's function for all these different organs and structures. So that's a great.
Evolutionists who are in the know won't apply junk DNA now as a vestigial sort of argument, because it's embarrassing that there are still evolutionists that are doing that to the ones that are in the know and understand the research.
Right. Great answer, Dr. J. Ramat, if you had a question.
Yeah, the critics like to point to the existence of organisms such as amoebas or mice that seem to have a great amount of DNA more than humans as a way to counter the evidence that suggests our genomes are a lot more functional than have ever been predicted. What is the best way to counter that?
Well, actually, that's a problem for the evolutionists, not for us. I mean, they're saying everything's going on to bigger and better, right? I mean, what's a fern doing with 400 chromosomes, for goodness sake? You know, this just shows the diversity, the creativity of the creator, and that he does what he wants, you know. And all this, there's that quote from Revelations. Secularists will ask me, you know, all these beautiful nebula in space that we've never been able to see till 100 years ago when we invented telescopes that can see these things. All these fish that are 2 miles under at the bottom of the sea, they're beautiful, and how useless that is, you know, that we can't see them. Well, of course, Revelation says, you know, thou art worthy, O God, to receive glory. You know, thou hast created all things, and for thy pleasure they're created. God could see them, so it was fun for him creating these things, and he's always been able to see them, and actually he's just waiting for us to catch on. Ecclesiastes 3 says, he has put the world in their hearts, so that no man may know his ways from the beginning to the end. I think that's a mandate from Scripture to study science. And like the creation mandate in Genesis, I think God is interested in seeing us, watch us learn. It's like if you're a baker and you have a wife and a child and the baby grows up, and as a preteen, the kid starts showing an interest in baking, wants to know how you did it, how you do it, and wants to learn about it himself. I think God is very pleased that we want to learn about the creation. So unlike the word on the street, Christians ought to love science. I mean, think of Isaac Newton, who said all of science is thinking God's thoughts after him. He might have been quoting someone else, but he did say that, and he did believe it. So as far as studying all of these, now I'm sorry, now I don't remember what your original question was. I got on a science rant there.
No, that's awesome. That's good. That's what you're supposed to do. It was basically the existence of organisms like amoebas and mice and things that have more DNA than humans.
Yeah, big deal. I mean, that's not a problem for us. God can make a lot of DNA in something simple looking, or very, very little DNA in something that he manages to have a complex body chemistry and structure and physiology. And that should be a conundrum for the evolutionist to explain, not for us. It makes all the sense in the world to a creationist worldview, but to an evolutionary worldview, what's these little things doing with so much DNA? Why would they have it? Evolution certainly wouldn't have done it. It wouldn't have had a survival advantage in natural selection if if bacteria and amoebas date back 3 billion years ago or 2 billion years ago. I mean, why would it have increased its amount of DNA? Just gene doubling? Well, perhaps so. Evolutionists believe in that, so do we. But why would it retain those genes? Why wouldn't they just fritter away? And how much of that is junk? I mean, it's really a problem for the evolutionists. You'll find a lot of times with an evolutionist debater or antagonist will throw down some kind of gauntlet to you. It's very easy to say, you know what, we have an explanation, but I'll bet you don't. Why would evolution give males nipples? That was in National Geographic, and they thought that really showed it to the creationists. But when the X chromosome and Y chromosome were invented, why did evolution give male mammals nipples, huh? Think about it. That's really a problem for them, not for us. And that we could discuss that at greater length, but I don't know. This might be a family show.
Well, as always, great answer. I just find that even like with some of the mouse genomes, redundancy seems to be a forward-thinking mechanism. So I've also noticed, just reading articles and listening to lectures on this, that Dr. J, the interconnectedness is amazing. It seems to indicate that you've got, let's say in a mouse genome, you knock out gene 1, nothing happens. Knock out gene 2, nothing happens. But knock out gene 1 and 2, and it's detrimental to the organism. So these are types of things to me that indicates good design, forward thinking. What are your thoughts on that, Dr. J?
That's exactly like that E. coli experiment that Hall did so many years ago, I think in the 80s, and that Kenneth Miller is so fond of quoting. They never mentioned that after they knocked out the gene that was modified, which was probably a redundant spare gene ready to take over a function in case there's a backup system in case the failure of the primary system. They never mention. They never like to mention that after you knock out that gene that then took over the job, that instead of a couple of generations later, another gene takes over the function. 10,000 generations later, no other gene has ever taken over that function, because there are limits to this kind of thing. You might call it a process that shows evolution, but that's really a wishful thinking, illusionary hope.
Right.
When really the underlying science is not a evolutionary genetic thing at all. It's rather that natural selection is a conserving, not a creating process.
Right. It makes me think that, when an evolutionist would look at, say, something like a spare tire in a car, to them, that would be junk. It would be redundant. But once you get a flat tire, suddenly it is useful. It's functional. It serves a purpose. So I think that's kind of what we see in the genome.
Yeah, and they might say, too, it could become co-opted
right.
a better seat cushion. Yeah.
Right, exactly. It's their storyboard.
And there's some logic to Michael Roos's co-opting mechanism he talks about. There's logic to it. That makes sense, but what's the drive? How's it actually going to do this? I mean, doing that would make sense, but how will it do it? The mechanism is what's, missing.
Right. Amen. Actually, so the chat's very lively. They're loving this. Like I said, you're a fan favorite. So before I forget, looks like there's a couple questions here. And since chats are flying by, maybe I'll pop this one up on screen, Dr. J. This is a question from Praise I Am That I Am. And he asks, my question is, what's your opinion on what's the best piece of evidence that separates man from apes?
Well, that word best is sort of relative there. We were talking about the debate between me and Professor Herman Mays in Huntington, West Virginia at Marshall University. And actually, evolutionists like to bring up the human chromosome 2 fusion. Because that's one of the things they like so much, I think it's wonderful and fabulous to bring up that no simian species, no group of the great apes has that fusion, but we all do. No human lacks that fusion, which really, really documents a non-relation between the genetic family trees, that because that change would have had to happen exactly at the moment that we split off from the apes for no apes to have it and all humans have it. And they like to point to it as some kind of a woo, senses tickling intimation that evolution is actually true. Because of that, I think that's the best argument against the connection between people and monkeys is the chromosome 2 fusion. Whether the fusion actually happened or not, I'll just give them that it did. I mean, the banding on the chromosomes lines up with that actual concept. But I think it's evidence that we're not related to monkeys. Now, then there's all the other, and I'm just going to call it the obvious stuff, like that our brains are 3 times bigger, and that the FOXP2 gene produces a protein on brain growth in us that's only 2 amino acids different from the brain growth enzyme in monkeys. And Svante Pabo, who did all that research on the FOXP2 gene, says, look, guys, there's got to be something way more than those 2 amino acids to cause this difference of we have the power of speech. Our brain is 3 times bigger. And there's a lot more going on. Just a la John Sanford and the mystery of the genome, there's a lot more going on that we just are ignorant of and really don't understand. And we need to be humble and admit that. But there are so many, the S curve in the human spine and a C-shaped curve in the monkey spine, the barrel rib cage in a monkey and a more flattened rib cage of a human. The things Dr. Menton talks about in the David Menton in the skull, the zygomatic arch, the dental arcade being more V-shaped in a human and more U-shaped, or on the front, all the teeth lined up in the front with the monkeys. Of course, the bones between the knuckle on a monkey are arched and ours are straight. The thumbs they have on their feet, all of these things are so, the hip bone, the scapula, so many things that are very easy to see as differentiations. And you can see these differentiations in the so-called missing link fossils. All of them can be shunted off to be either being humanoid or anthropoid, monkey-like. I in school, that was the intercom.
No problem, Dr. J. Well, so many good points there. I mean, chromosome 2, I completely agree. FOXP2 gene, genetic entropy from Dr. John Sanford. I find it funny that what we have is an identical number of chromosomes, but if we didn't have an identical number of chromosomes, we have a difference in chromosomes, but yet to the evolutionists, that is still evidence for human evolution. But if we had the same amount of chromosomes, it would still be evidence for evolution. So it's kind of like either way to them, it's always evidence. But from my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. J, that for a fusion event to take place and to be passed on to everybody, that would require some type of bottleneck of some kind. And yet that would be, according to our model, the flood bottleneck or maybe the Tower of Babel. So it seems like it would be better explained from a biblical perspective anyways.
Yeah, you would have to have a population genetic bottleneck, like 8 people on the ark. And really, it's worse than that. There are only 3 breeding couples on the ark. Noah, right, his wife, evidently at 600, were too old to have kids anymore. And so we only had 3 breeding couples that walked off the ark. Shem being about, I think he was 101 when his firstborn was. You think he was 98 when he got on the ark, something like that. But yeah, there'd have to be a bottleneck, and that way it would eliminate anybody. The odds are that Noah's family had the fusion. Whether whether all humans did at the time or not. I mean, it would be logical to assume from a creationist standpoint that monkeys and humans would have, especially chimpanzees and monkeys, would have very similar looking DNA because we have very similar physiologies and very similar gross anatomical structures too.
Right.
Of all the other living creatures, the monkeys look the most like us. What's the big whoop surprise if our DNA is very similar, if our chromosomes look very similar, even if at the beginning, if humans and monkeys had the same number of chromosomes and a fusion did occur? I would think it'd be very logical with the creation model, more logical actually, if monkeys and humans did originally start out with 24 pairs of chromosomes instead of the 23 that people have now. It could have been a genetic event in the past, and fusions happen all the time. A 14, let's see, what is it? 1421 translocation, where a part of one chromosome breaks off and fuses onto another one. That's one of the things that can happen resulting in Down syndrome. Not just trisomy of chromosome number 21, but a piece of 21, the crucial Downs forming part of 21, can break off during the making of sex cells during meiosis and can connect to a 14 and tag along and be tow trucked in as an extra, unplanned on copy of a segment of the 21st chromosome. And so you don't have to have a complete set of 3 chromosome 21s for Down syndrome to occur. You could just have a piece of a 21 that attached to a 14 before the chromosomes segregated during meiosis and made sperm cells or egg cells. And so fusion is not out of the question. It's not a silly idea. Now, whether it happened or not can be talked about and debated, but it certainly doesn't slam dunk anything in any way, shape, or form for evolution. It actually, I think, causes more of a problem.
Exactly right. Great point. I like the way you put it, because you're right. We could argue all day about, the area being highly degenerate or the lack of evidence for a cryptic centromere or the functional nature of the site to begin with. But even if you, for sake of argument, you want to just give it to them, it's still better evidence for our side anyway. So I love that. And one thing I wanted to branch off too, as you pointed out, because they'll point to like nested hierarchical patterns and homology as if it's any surprise, Dr. J, that we share more with the apes than we do with, say, fish or bacteria when it comes to anatomy, morphology, physiology, and genetics. So I like the way you put that, as if it's some kind of shock, right?
Tom Sanford's stuff about nested messages within message code, nested within nested code. That just makes the genome so complicated that any mutation tweaking on it is likely to cause, 20 things that are lethal
Right.
rather than cause one good thing that the organism actually is going to get.
Right. Great point. Now, before I forget, because the chat is so lively, everybody's enjoying this. This is awesome, Dr. J. We've got, what this is, it's a super chat. So you've got a fan who paid $20 to ask this question. So before I forget, I should ask it. He says, it's from Jungle Jargon. He says, my pet subject, why is the C to Y chromosome not found in Africa? Could it possibly be Nimrod, the great hunter, the son of Cush, who had a kingdom in the land of Shinar? The D to Y chromosome only recently went back to Africa. I personally wouldn't be sure how to answer that question, but I
haven't read about those, actually. There are so many different chromosomes that can be traced through these streams of genetic streams from the arc and on. As far as things disappearing from population and popping back as migrations lead back, I mean, you can easily see things like that happening. Don't forget, for instance, Neanderthals. We found Neanderthal fossils as far, south as Israel in Palestine. And then, of course, they're known for being in Northern Europe during the Ice Age. And also, it's now well established that Neanderthals interbred with other tribes of humans that were alive at the time. And so with all this gene flow going on, it's not too hard to imagine something disappearing from one area for a long time and then coming back with some interbreeding. I'm not sure. I certainly am not going to be able to answer that question in specific, because as far as the CY and the DY, I'm not sure what parts of which chromosomes they're actually talking about with that. But things disappearing and reappearing, as long as it's been held in as an heirloom seed, like in some part of the genome that didn't disappear, some breeding group, some gene pool that didn't disappear from the total gene pool with the humans, and it can come back, just like, I don't know, saving the scarlet ibis from extinction. Neanderthal genes have been saved from extinction. 4% of all modern Northern Europeans actually are carrying some Neanderthal DNA, and we've actually found some DNA that in the Neanderthals that may actually be helpful in immunity to various diseases. So they might have had some genetic superiority. It's a good thing they backbred some before they were driven to extinction as a tribe, much like many of the Great Plains Native Americans, like you've heard of the book, The Last of the Mohicans. Well, the Mohican tribe is gone now. The Cherokee, the Osage, and many of the other ones. The Chickasaw, they're all still here, but many of them did go extinct, like the Neanderthals. The same kind of thing happened.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that answer. That was a great answer, Dr. J. Well, what I love about the Y chromosome kind of brought something to mind, that when it comes to the chimpanzee and humans, there's a paper that I love that suggests that when you actually consider overall architecture, gene content, size differences, for example, you're looking at very, very high dissimilarity between human and chimpanzee Y chromosome. I think when you consider all of those things, it's like less than 35%, but yet the chimps are supposed to be our closest relative. Are you familiar with that data, Dr. Jackson?
Not so much. I'm more familiar with the data of comparing sequences from the Y chromosome among human populations.
Right.
Basically, the Y chromosome atom thing that the National Geographic's World Genomic Project did, and things like that. But as far as our Y chromosome being very different from the chimpanzees, there are a lot of differences. You don't forget, even if we were 98.6 or 99 point something, that really amounts to about 30 million base pairs.
Great point.
Yeah, out of the 3 billion we have. And those 30 million base pairs, that's a lot of encoded, very, very specific information. That's still a big difference.
Right. Great point. And they would have to explain how all of those differences, like you said, 30 million, could be fixed, within that 6 million years or so since.
And evolutionists still refer to that as Haldanes Dilemma.
Right. Right. So that's a great point. I love the way you put that even if we are 98% similar, it's still, there's a huge, like you said, Haldanes Dilemma, the waiting time problem. So that's a great point. A question I have here, Doc. Oh, yeah, go ahead, Dr. J.
It's important to point out these things they throw down at us and say, see, I mean, it's like that question, if God is so powerful, can he make a rock too big for him to lift? I mean, this is a trick, just like talking about the similarities between chimps and it's a shell game. It's a little sleight of hand thing, and the human chromosome 2 fusion thing, really, it's something on them. And this whole thing, can God make a rock too big for him to lift? It assumes a lot of erroneous assumptions. It assumes limits on how powerful God is, on how strong he is to lift something, how much he can create. And even Richard Dawkins said, if there was a God, he would have to be so far above us that merely conceptualizing him would be madness. And I agree with the atheist on that. Keep praying for Richard Dawkins. I still think he'd make an awesome Saul of Tarsus Christian convert, because he's very logical when it comes to God, or the conception of what God would have to be like. And saying that God has limits on his power, that question is erroneous because it doesn't apply to God. Limits don't apply to an infinite being. And if God existed, he would have to be infinite by definition.
Right. I completely agree. Actually,
I interrupted you, so you go on.
Oh, no. You can talk all day, Dr. J. We could listen to you for hours. So, I mean, this is already flying by. Great answers. I'm looking at the chat. Like I said, it's lively. Questions are flying by. Maybe I'll screen share this one. Lena Powell says, is it 100% certain that Hox genes are responsible for body plan differences?
That's Galadriel.
Yes, it is. And I'm a big Lord of the Rings fan, so I appreciate it, Lena.
Okay, now Hox genes or homeobox genes, master regulatory genes. The evolutionists have picked this up as a big important thing in evolution, because if one of those genes mutates in a beneficial way, it solves a lot of their problems, because you can get a whole bunch of traits at once. The master regulatory genes are those ones that they don't actually code for proteins, but they code for they code for, and I want to find the right word here, masterminding and coordinating the genetic activity of all the other genes, telling them when to do it and how much to do it at various times, like all that protein synthesis and hormones or proteins at puberty, all that genetic activity that's pre-programmed to happen. And the homeobox genes would do this. The evolutionists call such kinds of changes in the genome in Hox genes, they call this evo-devo, because these would be the developmental genes, the ones that control developmental progressions in the fertilized, the zygote, in the embryo, in the fetus, and then at other life-changing times in the development of the organism. So it's a big thing with them. So I'm surprised that anyone would question that Hox genes are terribly influential to the function of the genome. Evolutionists themselves are seizing on that data, that knowledge, and saying evo-devo would happen because of this. So that now evo-devo is theoretical, but the Hox genes and their influence on the entire activity of the genome, not on what the genome is, but what it does, that's pretty much everybody goes along with that. So I'm not sure whether that was supposed to be a difficulty for the creationists or not, but the evolutionists certainly believe it, and we do too.
Awesome. We got another question from the audience. It's right here. It's wondering, per your biblical genetic model of skin colors by the human race, how could every skin color or shade of skin color have shown up from Babel or from the flood? Surely there's not enough time.
Well, that's very simple. Back when I was in college, we thought there were like 15 different genes that had some sort of an influence on the pigment molecules, the various pigment molecules, particularly melanin, that is in your skin. Now we know it's more than 100 different genes. If every one of us is carrying 100 different genes that all have some little phase of impact on the tones in your individual skin, and just one person has 100 different genes. I mean, imagine the variety of genetic mix and match and shuffling the deck every generation and doling out. My sister and I are only 2 years apart, and she's darker skinned than I am. My half brother is lighter skinned than I am, and even in the same family. And I'm not even talking about racial, the thought of the notion of race. I'm just talking about in a family. You have a large family, you'll have a bunch of kids that have all different kind of hair colors and skin tones, and so the diversity would already have been there, even in Adam and Eve. And I like what Dr. David Menton mentions about that when you say, how could one breeding couple come up with all the diversity we have? Well, the genome's a lot more complicated than we think, and Adam and Eve would have had a lot of diversity inside of them. Don't forget, all of the so-called racial characteristics would have come from them, but really the ones we have now come from Noah, well, from his 3 sons and their 3 wives. But Eve was not, Eve was created, and her whole body was formed, And Adam actually was created already there, making sperm cells every day. Eve would have been created. She's the only woman that didn't inherit the DNA for her 400,000 egg cells. She didn't inherit those egg cells from her mother. So Eve could have had 400,000 different genomes in her ovaries. Whereas Adam is constantly making sperm cells from the genetic material he has available, Eve would have been an amazing storehouse. And how many kids did they have? How much genetic diversity did she pass on? When did she hit menopause? 500, 600? I don't know. You know, the Bible says Adam and Eve had many sons and daughters. Some traditions say they had 52 kids, but if you were not using birth control and you were the most perfect couple that ever lived, the healthiest, with the least mutations of anybody ever in history, I think they could have had an awful lot of kids. So genetic diversity and getting all the different skin tones, oh my goodness, it's been very easy from the creation model. We can see changes in a population's occurrence of certain skin tones within just a few generations. From Babel to now, it wouldn't have been any kind of a problem, you know, especially when there are 100 different genes that all contribute to it.
Well, that was a phenomenal answer. That right there is an answer I think everybody should hear, Dr. J, because that's a commonly used, typically objection. So from what I gathered, it would be within their genetic potential to produce every shade of skin we see on the planet today. To me, it would make no sense, Dr. J, as the critics sometimes suggest that Adam and Eve would have been created with no pre-existing genetic diversity. You know, clearly it would make sense both scientifically and theologically that God would have front-loaded Adam and Eve with pre-existing genetic variety and potential. So that's a really good answer. Another question here, Dr. J. Let me see. I'll see if I can screenshot.
I've got a lot of questions. I'll try to be more succinct with my answers.
No, I think you're doing great. The answers are perfect. I'm losing my place here on the chat. Okay, here we go. Smokey Saint asks, would the good doctor mind giving me his best argument / perspective to debunk a naturalistic paradigm? It looks like he has a debate today on that subject. Maybe he's looking for some advice.
Well, don't forget that naturalism, like you said, it's a paradigm. It's a worldview. It's an atheistic worldview. As far as debunking it, I guess just any of the intelligent design sort of things or anything in the creation model, I've always felt that the most powerful argument is not the structure, the wonderful structure of the DNA double helix molecule, not even the amazing genetic code with the triplet codons and all of that sort of thing. It's the fact that the DNA molecule and the code is actually being used as a vehicle for information. Now we're going a la Werner Gitt, and in the beginning was information, a la Walter Ramain and the biotic message. The fact that DNA actually contains, somehow got useful information and gobs of it, descriptive information, information on how to make things, recipes, instructions, directions. This is not random things, this like alphabet soup floating around in the, this is actually complex, reams and reams of complex instructions and information, and, you know, to the tune of 3 billion base pairs in each one of our cells. And I think that is probably the most powerful argument. Whenever I've been invited to speak to the Atheist Club at a university campus, I will always talk about the information in the DNA. I think that would probably be the most powerful argument against naturalism, saying that nature put itself together. Norbert Wiener, the father of information science, said that information is not matter. It is not energy, and no naturalism that does not account for that will be able to survive the day.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that answer, Dr. J. A question that I have here, Dr. Jackson, evolutionists for years have pointed to shared genetic mistakes as one of the so-called best lines of evidence for universal common ancestry, especially in regards to common ancestry with the apes. These pseudogenes they point to, Dr. J, they say is evidence of shared relationship, I guess, because these mistakes have been passed on through common ancestry. Is this true? And what would be, in your opinion, the best way to address an argument such as this?
Well, there are a lot of genetic markers that are the same. One of the most famous is the endogenous retroviral sequences and all of that. There are 98,000 of them in our genome, but only 14 of them actually match up with the ones the monkeys have. I think that is way less than you could get just by chance. But also those other genetic mistake things. You know what? If our DNA was created very similar to the monkeys, then we would have the same genetic loci that are most susceptible to mutational mistakes because the mutational errors, the weakness in the genome. And so it would not be a surprise if in a monkey vitamin C gene that a human might also have the same copying error happen in a copy error sensitive or copy error prone portion of that very similarly structured gene, that the monkey would have it and the human would also get it. Now, the vitamin C pseudogene, well, it's just what they say. It's a pseudogene. It looks a lot like the vitamin C generating gene in other creatures, but it's, even according to evolution, it's laying there so totally vulnerable to mutational change and so totally invisible to natural selection, totally untouchable by natural selection. These things could have just by random mutations could have been something so totally different and just drifted by random genetic mutations to look more like a vitamin C gene. It could have been one in the past. It might not have been. There's no proof of that. It's true that monkeys and people can't generate their own vitamin C. Linus Pauling, who did all the research on vitamin C, guesstimated how much vitamin C we should really have based on how much vitamin C creatures who have functioning vitamin C genes can make for themselves. Linus Pauling himself took 18,000 milligrams of vitamin C a day. So during the COVID time, I'm stoking on vitamin C, maybe not that much. But these pseudogenes and these other, endogenous retroviral sequences or the ERVs, or just places, loci in the genetic makeup of the humans and monkeys where their DNA is the same anyway, these would be the same sites that would be prone to copying errors anyway. So it's not surprising by the creation model that some of these would be the same. Like my favorite thing with the ERVs is 98,000 and only 14 of ours actually line up with the monkeys. Shouldn't there be a little bit more than that if we were really
good point.
Same as the monkeys?
Actually, that's a great answer. And those endogenous retroviruses and other, let's say, subclasses of retrotransposons, like you were saying, Dr. J, aren't we finding that a lot of those are functional anyways, important to our genetics?
Well, some of them are. And, in the creationist model, one of the problems is, why did God make bacteria and viruses and funguses that make us sick? But you know very well there are many bacteria that we would die without, not just the E. coli, but the nitrogen-fixing bacteria and many other kinds of bacteria that in the original creation, they weren't virulent. They were all meant to actually support the other forms of life, like the fruits on the trees were meant to support the fruit-eating forms of life, like us and the monkeys and the fruit bats. But what about viruses? Why did God make viruses? Many creationist geneticists are thinking that the viruses might have actually been designed as a part of the living world to maintain a supply of spare parts in the genes and gene sequences, shuttling genomic fragments from one member of the same species to another. Now, bacteria do this all the time, but you couldn't have eukaryotes or multicellular organisms doing this without the help of some kind of a little vehicle to do this. And viruses do take the DNA and insert it. Maybe that was this is just a theory. It's just a hypothesis within the creationary worldview, but viruses might have actually had a maintenance. They were like little, I don't know, electricians you call to your house, or plumbers you call to your house. They might be genetic spare part repair salesmen, whatever, workers in the entire genetic world of many, many different species. That's a possibility. I don't know if I got too far away from the question, but it's an interesting idea. Again, not something you can prove, but it might be an apologetic for why are there viruses.
Okay, awesome. Well, we're running out of time with you, but we still have more questions ourselves. But here's another one from the audience for you. What are orphan genes and how are they a problem for evolution?
Well, evolutionists themselves talk about orphan genes as being interesting. These are, let's see, to my understanding of orphan genes, they are genes that don't appear to have come from anywhere. They're just there. And they don't have a genetic antecedent in the evolutionary genetic history of the genome. They're there and they can't find any predecessors. Kind of like, it's like the missing link isn't there. Like in the fossils, we don't have the missing link there, that there's no missing link leading up to this gene. There's nothing in supposed ancestors, no sign of this, like, something that's in humans that's not in monkeys at all. And so I think that's my understanding of orphan genes. Now, evolutionists accept this as a problem, but they might say that, well, the species that were the carriers from one generation have gone extinct, and we just haven't found the genetic evidence that we were looking for.
Awesome, Dr. J. I do have a good question, I think, from the audience, that because we've got so many people in the chat, I'm going to try and find it again. It was, I think I remember what he asked. So the question is, okay, I found it. For Dr. J, what's the best way to respond when evolutionists argue that microevolution is just the same as macroevolution? Okay. We've heard that all the time.
Oh my, I'm sorry, but there is so devoid of science logic when they say that. It really should be called micro variation. They only call it microevolution. Good, sounds good for evolution. I mean, that's little evolution, and all you have to do is use your imagination, and you can think of it as big evolution. I like what one creationist said, that if you see a bunch of birds on telephone wire and they're all together, one flies up in the air and the others follow it, and you go, see that? See that? That's micro bird flying. And we can see that. I'll bet birds can fly to the moon then. See, there's a limit to how high birds can fly because of the way they fly. They need air to fly in, their wings, the airfoils in that. They can't leave the atmosphere. They can't even get very high in the atmosphere, 10,000 feet up. Their lungs are amazing. But this is the same thing here. You see, this is very well known in the evolutionist community. If in 100 years there are more redheaded people than there were before, this would be a change in a gene frequency, the frequency of a gene, and that's the definition of evolution. Therefore, evolution has occurred. But there's no new DNA, no new genetic traits, no new genes would be needed for this because the red hair gene is already here. That's microevolution. I mean, just a change in the frequency of a gene would be considered microevolution. But that's not the process that Darwin posited that could get fish to turn into people. You must have new. See, just like the bird can't leave the atmosphere, mutation and natural selection can't create new DNA, with new genes and new traits. And if by some wild chance it ever did happen, how could it happen a billion times? It would be necessary billions and billions of times for one bacteria or bacterium or group of them, 3.5 billion years ago, to turn into every living species on the planet today, of every kingdom and every phylum. It's just unimaginable. So macroevolution is imaginary, hypothetical. It's a cool idea. Microevolution is something you can see, test in the lab. We're talking about, the peppered moth, Biston bechellaria, industrial melanism. We're talking about slight changes that can be observed, and these are just things that are variations. The antibiotic resistance in bacteria, again, minor variations, swapping of genes, no new genetic material is necessary for this, and they'll say it's proof of evolution. It's microevolution, which should really be called microvariation. But that process that actually causes microevolution has absolutely, and I can say this, zero to do with any process that would achieve a macroevolutionary thing. Just like flapping the wings in the atmosphere would have nothing to do with soaring through space like a Leviathan can, in Farscape. I know I'm a horrible sci-fi addict because I'm a geek.
Don't worry, I'm a big fan of sci-fi as well. But exactly what you said there, Dr. J, a change in allele frequencies and populations over time isn't going to take a single cell-like ancestor into a whale over billions of years. And as you said there in regards to limits, if I were to work out and be able to, say, bench press, 300 pounds in a couple years, there you go, will I be able to bench press 10,000 pounds in 20 years, right? Clearly there are limits. So.
Sure you can, yeah. Yeah. That's logical. I'm sorry, I don't mean to sound sarcastic or making but the Christian people, the Bible-believing people, the biblical worldview people need to realize that these are stories that the secular evolutionists tell each other, the atheist evos tell each other, and they just tell it over and over again until it sounds better and better. They say millions and billions of years or hundreds of millions until it sounds so good and so normal that saying anything or suggesting anything other than that sounds absurd. It's just merely self-talk.
Oh, sorry, I was on mute there, Doctor. Exactly right. Well, that's why, and I guess when they're proposing those ideas as empirical science, sometimes it's okay, I think, to poke a little fun, because like you said, it requires a lot of imagination. But before we reach the hour mark, I guess a couple more questions that I want to get out there that are interesting. I really enjoyed your debate with Dr. Herman Mays. He's quite outspoken. I think you did an awesome job. The one argument Mays seemed to focus on, though, almost the entire time had to do with what he called neutral variation or third position codon redundancy. I thought you had a great answer to it. What does Mays mean by this, and what would be the best response to it as a creationist? Say, Mays were to use that argument against us. What would be the best way to approach that, Dr. J?
Well, he just did a statistical workup on the patterns of triplet codon redundancy in hypothesized genetic lines. And then he said, if evolution is true, this is the pattern we should see in the redundancy in living things. And if the creation model is true, this is what we should see. Actually, I think that Robert Carter would be a good guy to actually do the workup on that. Or who's that new guy, the young fellow who also debated Mays after I did?
Right, Dr. Jensen.
Yeah, Jensen. He would do a good job on that. They're really professional geneticists. But all he did was do a statistical workup. And there's even a book called How to Lie with Statistics. And I'm not going to outright accuse Dr. Mays of lying, but I am going to accuse him of fooling himself with that kind of, when you generate a computer program, you program it to do what you want it to do. Yeah, it was doing some analysis, but he already had an idea of what he wanted it to do. And all he had was a very complex mathematical algorithm that gave him what he wanted, and he knew that none of the audience had seen this. This is a very narrow and specific zone of his own personal research. I don't know even how interested other evolutionists have become in it, but this was something he knew no one could talk about in specifics but him. Now you can talk about in generalities and show that it can't be successfully or lock, stock, and barrel and proven to be generalizable to the real situation. This was a statistical workup. And you said you had other things you could add to that. I'll let you do that perhaps on another episode. I hope that I answered that well enough, but I know we have other questions and I want to get to them.
No, absolutely. I think that was a great answer. I loved your answer that you provided him in the debate. The fact that I think they assume that these third position codon, like the redundancy, I think they assume that it's not functional or multifunctional, and the nested patterns that he points to are obvious from a creationist perspective too. So I think that's a great answer. You're right. A question here that has kind of come in a number of variations. So I'll just kind of ask it straightforward. What are your thoughts on the hominid fossil record? When it comes to human evolution, is this evidence for human evolution? Does it look like human evolution? What are your thoughts on that, Dr. J?
Oh my, there used to be so many missing link hominid fossils. And now they're all being categorized as either monkey fossils or human fossils, never monkey humans. I mean, the Cro-Magnon, you never hear that anymore. They just realize that's Homo sapiens. And Heidelberg man, the evolutionists are now calling that an archaic Homo sapiens. Neanderthals are now being called Homo sapiens variety Neanderthalensis because their similarity is so much to ours. I mean, the old definition of species was they can breed with each other and have kids. Well, Neanderthals bred with Cro-Magnons, other Homo sapiens, and had kids successfully, a lot. And so they weren't a different species. They are Homo sapiens Neanderthalensis. We're Homo sapiens sapiens, or variety, what are called modern humans. You could even say Homo sapiens African, Homo sapiens Asian, Homo sapiens Caucasian, Homo sapiens Native American. Yeah, these are just gene pools within one race, one kind. The Bible doesn't teach the concept of race. It just says all men are of one flesh. Actually, race is an evolutionist. I'm sorry, I've had evolutionists get mad at me, but race is an evolutionist concept. Darwin's book was on the origin of the species by means of natural selection of favored races in the struggle for life. Darwin himself is very documentable as a rabid racist. He believed that the Anglo-Saxon race was the master race, like Hitler believed that the Aryan race was the master race, and Darwin believed that the Caucasians would outcompete and put to extinction all the inferior races of the world. Of course, he thought his race was the best. And it was in the early 2000s that new genetic information came forth that there can be more genetic difference between two members of the same so-called race than between two members of two different races. That proves that genetically the whole concept of race it's just not true. It never was. And in the early 2000s, when that was discovered, I was in a debate at East Tennessee State University, and audience members had put their questions on index cards, and me and the evolutionist were looking through the index card during the refreshment break, and we had a lot of different cards. Some we thought were good for the evolutionist professor to answer, and some was good for the creationist professor to answer. But me and my opponent deliberately kept that last card, where did races come from? We kept that because we knew we could both agree on that one. We wanted to save that for the last comments of the night, because there's no such thing as race. There just isn't. There are different species of living things, but within the human species, there aren't different races. And so the hominid species, all of those missing links, they've been finding out that all these things we thought were stepping stones leading up to humans, they were bona fide humans. And this goes to the structure that David Menton talks about, and the genetics that others will talk about, that Jeanson talks about in his new genetic analysis of the ARC bottleneck. You notice that I'm quoting many other creationists who are in those specialty fields that are just brilliant. I've often said if I could have one creationist in my shirt pocket during a debate, it'd be Dr. David Menton. But nowadays, Jeanson and Carter, the younger ones, young compared to me anyway. I mean, they're the new breed, and it's not that they're different; it's that we know so much more, and they've done deliberate creationist research on using accepted and known effective research tools, and man, it's just exploding. All of the evidence, really, it's making evolution look so bad.
Amen.
Evolutionists are having to go to epigenetics. They're having to leave genetics. They're having to leave paleontology and go to something a genetic plasticity, or these weird things where the environment actually causes the DNA to change to what is needed. These mystical, self-guided, almost like there's some sort of a god like Thor or Gaia doing it. What's the driving force? It's never been very easy to talk about what drives evolution, but now it's really, and David Menton said, watch for the evolutionists to become more metaphysical. And I heard him say that 20 years ago, and it's come true. It's just it's basically magic now and not science. And they're backed in a corner, and they know they've got to just sound smart and deeply philosophical and very intensely mathematical. Nikola Tesla said that scientists were getting more and more away from true experimentation and going into mathematical derivations of things, to where they're just off and away on some kind of pipe dream that has nothing to do with reality or science. Louis Pasteur said, if you can't put forth something through an experiment, you shouldn't even put it forth. Whereas all of these things are thought experiments now in the evolutionist community. They know this. They just have to sound smart, get tenure, endowed chairmanships, grants from the National Science Foundation, and control the universities. Well, it's happened. And stuff like happened in that movie, God's Not Dead, that's not too far from what, as I've toured college campuses, many students have told me that sort of a thing. Maybe not where the professor allows the student to actually say some lessons and all that, but the harassment, the persecution that non-evolution believing students get from evolution professors is mean. It's bullying. These people that control the grade book and the degree plans, it's pretty bad. It's of the same vehemence that you see in God's Not Dead, because that's all they've got left. They can't use logic and reason anymore. They've got to use the force of their personalities, and I pity them. I feel sorry for them, but they've been backed into a corner by science.
Yeah, well, you mentioned right before we began, too, it's the only theory in all of science that's protected by law. So,
to protect your theory, what's that tell you about your theory?
Exactly. Not very sturdy, is it?
Well, I got to say, for you. Oh, I'm sorry, Matt. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say one last question I saw from the audience. It was a while ago. Didn't get to it. It was just specifically about what is your opinion on Homo erectus? Like you.
Well, there's a real problem with that. Fred Spoor at University College in London. I guess it was about almost 10 years ago now. He used, I think it was potassium argon, and dated some Homo erectus fossils and Homo habilis fossils as being the same age, 1.45 million years ago. Now, Fred Spoor said it was like finding out that your grandmother and your great-grandmother were really sisters. I mean, I mean, they're supposed to be a million years apart from each other in the evolution story. And to find that they actually lived together, they were contemporaries that just looked good for the evolution story. Homo erectus turns out, according to the DNA evidence, has been shown that it couldn't be our human ancestor. Newsweek magazine reported that back in 2006, I think it was, that the researchers had shown that Homo erectus, yeah, could be a relative, but it's a dead end on the family tree, that Homo erectus could most certainly not, and I've got documentation for this, it's very easy, certainly not be one of our direct ancestors. It might be a branch on the tree to them, but you're getting these direct ancestors on the trunk that leads up to us. They're all being either knocked out completely or relegated to side branches on the evolutionary family tree, and Homo erectus has really become one of those.
Actually, that's a great point, Dr. Jackson, because what I find funny is their claimed best transitionals. I've heard it with Homo habilis, Homo Australopithecus sediba, for example, that they say are, you know, mosaics of humans and apes. Now, if they're up to date on the research with habilis and even sediba, they've been ousted as so-called transitionals or you know, human ape ancestors in the direct line to Homo. So they, yeah, and it's happening all the time. So that's a great point.
Lee Berger, who brought forth sediba, also brought forth Homo naledi, and the evolutionist community didn't react well to either of those themselves. I think, you know, Berger kind of, I don't know, he's a little bit of a P.T. Barnum type in the evolutionist community, and he throws things up and out there very quickly, but there are little logical problems with making that a nice fit in the family tree. I'm sorry, I did it to you again, standing for truth there.
No, that was a great response because you're right. And I find it amazing now when, you know, we're in 2020 and when you read directly from their literature, which I like to do, that's kind of where you find the hidden gems. They talk about just how messy it is. There's less clarity. Turns out that the Homo genus is now known to have coexisted with your Australopithecines. Sediba has been ousted. And I'm not sure if you're familiar, there's a book that I really highly recommend to everybody by Dr. John Sanford and Christopher Roop titled Contested Bones, where they discuss a lot of the like Neanderthals and a lot of your so-called pre-humans that are on islands like the hobbits, the Lindi, being the result of rapid genetic degeneration, right? From founder effects, inbreeding, isolation. So I just kind of wanted to throw that in there, but yeah.
I like what you said about the original reports that come out at the time that some new find is made public. You need to read what those people say, because very quickly the revisionist science community amongst the evolutionists is going to spin doctor those things. The guy who dug up the Ardipithecus ramidus out of UCal Berkeley. One of the day he announced it to the world, he said, "This is not the missing link ancestor." Yet a few months later, it was on the cover of National Geographic as a 4 million year old woman. And the guy, his name's slipping my mind at the moment, but it was him and Owen Lovejoy worked on the Ardipithecus ramidus, and they said it's not the missing link. And yet the guy who digs it up often will find it's in the wrong layer, or it has some bones that make it wrong. It doesn't fit the story, but it's close. And that's what they'll say. The guy that digs it up says it's not the missing link, but then it ends up in the textbooks within just a few years. And in the not the journals, but in the public consumed science things like Omni, Scientific American, and National Geographic. They pick it up and they just canonize it, even though the person who discovered it said it's not the missing link.
Right. It's amazing. And you find it right in their literature, like you said. One thing I wanted to say, Dr. J, in regards to
Tim White. It was Tim White who did the Ardipithecus ramidus. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, you're right. You're right. And I love your stuff on human evolution too. So I'm glad I was able to get that in there. There's, to be honest with you, with all the questions we have, we could probably do this for 30 hours. We're not going to do that, Dr. J. We're going to wind it down now because we're just going over the hour mark. One thing I wanted to say in regards to something you said earlier, with amazing defenders of creation such as yourself, Dr. Jensen, Dr. Sanford, Menton, Carter, and so on, I would not want to be an evolutionist battling you guys. So, I'm happy to be on the creationist side. So I think we'll end it with this question then, because this is always a question people like to see answered, and you're so good at it. Evolutionists attempt, Dr. J, to downplay the findings of dinosaur red blood cells, soft tissues, and so on. We kind of touched on this before we went live. What is the best approach to the evolutionists who deny that type of what I find to be amazing evidence?
Well, just go ahead and cite Robert Baker, cite Mary Schweitzer, cite University of North Carolina, and Mark Armitage with the soft tissue and the Triceratops horn. Cite the mosasaur jaw that had collagens that couldn't have been, they were so different from bacterial collagens. Cite the secular sources, and there are many now since the 2005 reveal that Mary Schweitzer did on the red blood cells. There's so many of those sort of things now. And don't cite creationist sources. So I guess that leaves Mark Armitage out, even though it was objective science. Cite the evolutionists and the leaders in the evolutionist community that agree, yes, we found this. At first, they tried on the T-Rex blood to say, well, these were little rafts of mucus that the bacteria had created to protect themselves, and they just happened to be red, round, and the size of red blood cells, and moving single file through these perversion canals in the bone. And then they tried to say that iron in the red blood cells had super polymerized the red blood cells, because iron can be used to polymerize proteins. But in that case, it would just have been a sheet of plastic. They tried over and over again for more dog ate my homework excuses, and none of them really shake out as logical to the situation. None of them really explain how these things can last. They just said, well, obviously they can last longer than we thought. No, the degradation or the spontaneous decomposition of protein molecules into single amino acids, cleaving the thymine dimers, and all those peptide bonds would naturally fall apart. That kind of stuff is clocked at a max of 100,000 years. And these things are often, well, they're 1,000 years older than that. 1,000 times older than that. So this stuff, they don't have an answer to that. They've never found an answer to that. They wish it never happened. They're celebrating and say, let's dig up some more dinosaur bones and find more of this stuff. But it's almost like a drug addict overdosing. They're killing themselves with this and pretending very, very hard that it isn't a problem. They're making it an elephant in the room, and they're admitting there's an elephant, but the nature of the elephant is that it kills their timeline scientifically. And I've never heard a good answer for it. And there isn't one. Of course, there isn't gonna be.
That's, once again, Dr. J, that's an awesome answer. I got to say, this was awesome. You are definitely a fan favorite of this channel. The hour flew by. Great, great answers and a great interview. So thanks so much for giving us your time. Thanks also to the audience for some awesome questions. You guys are superstars, and thanks to Matt for helping with this interview. I want to give it to you, Dr. J, for some final words, some final thoughts before we close it down. Once again, thanks so much for giving us your time.
Do you want some final thoughts?
Yeah. Okay. I guess you can end it for it.
Is that what you wanted me to do?
Yes.
Oh, all right. Okay. I didn't want to be, pushing my way in on that.
No,
So,
of course. Yeah, go ahead.
I think the whole thing, ever since I was a college student in the 70s, And I first heard Dwayne T. Gish and Henry Morris and Harold Slusher and John Morris and all of them speaking, I was thrilled that there were scientists, research scientists. I mean, Gish worked for Upjohn Corporation. You know, he was a biochemist. And at the time, Morris's hydraulic engineering textbook was still being used at Virginia Tech, where my stepfather went for an electrical engineering degree. I mean, these people are authored, credentialed, research scientists. We've got them now. To hear them talking about God being the creator, to see that they are not stupid. I mean, word on the street, Richard Dawkins said in the New York Times, if you meet somebody who claims not to believe in evolution, you may be absolutely certain that person is stupid, ignorant, or insane. I mean, that's just rhetoric. I mean, you know, I'm not stupid because I'm a lifetime member of Mensa, the Genius Club, you know, and I'm not ignorant because I have 4.5 degrees. I'm counting half a master's in chemistry. And you know, I don't have any documentation to show that I'm not insane. And indeed, that's the only way that theistic evolutionists have been able to dismiss me. Well, you're just crazy. You've had a crisis, a psychological crisis of your faith. That's why you're off your rocker like this. So I've been called insane. I've been called insane by evolutionists too, but they can't say that I'm stupid or ignorant. Christian people who have a biblical worldview, who aren't scientists, you know, who are brilliant in your own area that you have knowledge in. You know, you might not be a scientist though. Don't be afraid of these people in lab coats. Just because they've got a degree doesn't mean they're smarter than you. They're not. They're not smarter than you. I've always liked to say to audiences, it's like what the Wizard of Oz said at the end when he was giving out all those things to the Tin Man and the Lion and the Scarecrow. And he said to the Scarecrow, you know, there are people back where I come from, there are places of great learning, and those people have no more brains than you've got, but they've got one thing you haven't, and that's a diploma. That's it, brothers and sisters. There are college professors who have lower IQs than you. They've just got a lot of book learning. And that's good. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. But you're smart too. If you don't have degrees, you know, I've had even people say that they don't believe I really have those degrees. And I said, well, then you've just been beaten in an argument by someone with no degrees. I think that's worse, don't you? So, I mean, they're always trying to put you down. If somebody talks with you and it's clear they're trying to force you to believe I'm smart, you're stupid, you just have to listen to me, and whatever trash I pour on you, you just got to wear it. No. In my classes that I teach in this room, I put the pedal to the metal every day. The people that come in and out of my room, they leave feeling smarter than when they came in, not feeling dumber. They leave feeling like they not only know more, but they were smarter before they came in than they knew. And I've showed them how smart they are. Now, if you're trying to brainwash people or trick them or let them believe a lie, what you're going to do is try to convince them they're stupid. That after you leave their presence, you feel less intelligent. You feel aware now of your crippling lack of intelligence compared to their brilliant awesomeness. You know what? They're not smarter than you. And guess what? You've got the Spirit of God, the Spirit of truth. If truth be known, you can run circles around these people by the power of the Spirit of God. Jesus did it in arguments, and I don't think he used his God powers to cheat in those debates. I think he did just what we're to do. Lean on the Holy Spirit of God, who is the Spirit of truth. I think he was just showing us how it's done. And you can do it too, certainly to defend inside yourself. Your faith is not anti-intellectual. So there you go. You asked for a little sermon there. So there it was. And I hope that was an encouragement to the household of faith and the members of the body of Christ. In Jesus' name, be encouraged.
Well said, Dr. J. Well said. Those are probably the best closing thoughts I've heard in a while. So, amen. Like I said, we can listen to you speak all day. I can't thank you enough for doing this. This was so incredibly helpful to us and our audience, Dr. J. So, God bless you for all you've done. You know, we really love you here. So,
God bless.
perfect way to end it. God bless. Thank you to the audience for some awesome questions. We had a lot of really, really good participation today. We actually had a character from Lord of the Rings herself in here. So there you go. So we're going to end it here.
Gwyneth Paltrow, is that?
Yeah, there you go. So we're going to end it here. Thanks again, Dr. J. Thanks, Matt. And thanks to the audience. Everybody, God bless. Standing for Truth is out.
For all those who appreciate the work that we're doing here on Standing for Truth, please hit that subscribe button,